I'm Rich Sides, Culture Consultants. One of the things I love about my job is we work exclusively with manufacturing and distribution companies. And so I get out a lot into old plants in the middle of nowhere. For those of you that have worked in manufacturing for a long time, you know what I'm talking about. And so why are these manufacturing plants in the middle of nowhere? Because there's water nearby, right? So there's rivers, and old manufacturing towns sprung up because of rivers providing power and providing transportation, right? And so the title of this conversation today is about where we're going from here, right? So I think to know where we're going, we need to look back a little bit in terms of the history of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so if you go back 1870, 1880, power plants didn't exist. Electricity didn't exist, right? So how were manufacturing plants powered? They were powered with paddle wheels, and then ultimately steam engines, and there were these big drive shafts that would go through the plant, and then you have leather belts that were turning the machines. And I love going in the old factories and looking up, and sometimes you can see some of the remnants of the old drive shafts through the manufacturing plant. And can you imagine being like the sales guy from like Westinghouse or Edison or something and walking in and saying, okay, trust me, I'm going to give you electricity, which is very dangerous. I'm going to hook up your plant. You're going to trust me that when it goes down, yeah, I know like when it goes down, your plant's going to be down, but trust me, it'll be okay, right? And we're going to change out all your machines, change out all your drive shafts, and put in individual motors, right? That's where we're at today in computing. It's the same thing, right? We're at a nexus point. So what do I hear when I talk with our clients about, wow, well, it's dangerous. I don't have control of my data. It's dangerous because when the cloud goes down, my plant goes down, right? Project Kuiper. So there's Starlink, there's Kuiper. There's going to be like 10,000 satellites up in the sky providing ubiquitous internet access across the entire planet. Okay? That's the sea change that we're looking at in terms of cloud adoption versus on-prem. We're going to be looking back in 20 years and laughing about, you mean we were afraid that the internet would go down? Like that's similar to like we're afraid that electricity is going to go out, right? It's the same kind of a thing. So I just want you to kind of keep that in mind. It's not a question of when are we moving into kind of ubiquitous all access internet and all access systems. It's just really a question of when. And where do you fall in that adoption curve, right? So there were some factories that adopted electricity, but they had a single power plant, single motor, large motor that was driving the facility. Other times, a little bit later, because I wanted to go to the individual machine drives, right? Question of when, not if, okay? So that's kind of our perspective at Ultra. And we're about just kind of helping you guide through some of these questions. So now, what I'm going to try to do is just draw a comparison between the implementation of an on-prem and a cloud. So like, what do you have to do? Like, what's different about a cloud project or a SaaS project versus an on-prem? And there's a few differences. There's a lot of similarities though. So I'm going to point out some of the similarities. I'm going to point out some of the differences between them. No matter what system project you're doing, right, you have to have a structured approach to it. You have to know where you're going, what's your team going to look like, how are you going to build it, how are you going to test it, how are you going to make sure you're not going to screw up your company when you do it, and how are you going to get live and successful with it. That's the Ultra methodology. That's kind of what so, thank you. All right. So we break them into tracks, and you can slice and dice this a number of ways, right? You have to have a good project management scheme. A lot of our clients don't really, especially like in process manufacturing industries, like they don't have a lot of projects. They tend to do things in terms of continuous work to process every day, and then they get into these large projects, and it's like, well, how do you manage a project? There's an art to it and a science to it. Okay, so you got to make sure that you have folks that are really experienced with project management. Chris mentioned infrastructure. There are differences in infrastructure, and I'm going to talk about those because how you structure the project and how you support it in the infrastructure is different. And then reports, interfaces, data conversions, RICE, RICE-F. There's a whole bunch of vernaculars out there. Making the thing do what you want while not modifying it. Okay, how to interact with it, how to enhance it, how to modify it. Next thing is business processes. Business processes compared between the systems, maybe there's a little bit, but that's really more about you than it is about the software, okay? Master data, yes, you have to have master data. Now imagine you have master data, one system here and one cloud with Amazon, another one over here with Azure, another one over here, plus some on-prem stuff. How do you make all this work together? That's the big question, Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit. You're the guy in the plant that was maintaining the leather belts, right? Keeping them lubricated and replacing them and stuff. And then this variable drive motor comes in. I'm out of a job, right? So similar type of questions and fears around SaaS related to your organization. And there's some cool things there and some not so cool things, but we'll talk about some of that as well. I'm going to get all this done in 10 minutes. So, all right, project management. All those tracks that I talked about, you need to have somebody in charge of the track, okay? And for smaller companies, sometimes that's the same person wearing multiple hats, but you got to focus on these vertical tracks. Make sure that you got folks lined up with them. And then across that are business processes. And think in terms of integrated business processes, procure to pay. How do I buy? How do I receive? How do I pay for it? Those are all connected, right? So you need an integrated process team to fit that. So who's in charge of procure to pay or quote to cash or order to cash? Those are integrated processes, okay? Plan to produce, design to deploy, hire to retire. There's all these integrated things, right? Who's in charge of this stuff? And I can't say fire, so you say retire. Okay. All right. So infrastructure considerations. This is going to kind of be a rapid spin through here. The thing I love about SaaS is that you don't have to install servers and configure servers. Okay. So we at Ultra, we love SaaS because boom, like you sign the contract within a couple of weeks, the environment is spun up and you're getting your hands on the software. We don't have to wait for the army to come in with all the servers that you're going to need to get lined up, get them all configured, get them all working together. The environment already exists. So you're moving much more quickly into the engagement, which is cool. Ubiquitous, that means everywhere. That's a big consultant word. So I'd like to put at least once every 2 weeks. So ubiquitous, it's a big paradigm shift. So ubiquitous means I can get access anywhere. So when your SaaS environment's up, the world's up, right? So that has some implications. Ubiquitous access is great for you. For your competitors, you want to make sure you keep them out. Okay, so there's security concerns around it, but it's up. So it's up fast, and your folks have your hands on it. Now, when you have remote work teams and you have consultants that are configuring stuff, right, they don't have to be on site as much. Okay, so it's cool. It's fast. You don't have to worry about backups and security. That's one of the first things I do is where I go into a plant and I'll take a picture of their data room and you'll see like the wires across the lights and stuff like that. And I ask about their backups, and inevitably something's screwed up with the way their backups. I say, well, when's the last time you did a test restore? I'm like, okay, so that's worry-free. On the flip side, last time I checked, we're not at infinite bandwidth yet, okay? So some websites run faster than others because there's internet connections between you and there. Someday, once Elon Musk's satellites are up there and we all got 10 gigabyte internet speeds, it won't be as much of a deal. But today, there's a choke point there. So you have to be conscious about like how much stuff is moving back and forth between you and the cloud, right? So if you have like massive amounts of information, right, and you need like instantaneous response and that stuff, you got to be careful, right? We've all gone to websites and stuff where like for like the checkout carts and stuff like that, and it's going off on a remote call to another service and stuff, and that can slow things down. So having the right architect in the middle of all this to make sure that all this plays together through these bandwidth chokes is important. How fast, how far are you going with Internet of Things? I'm sure there were some discussions this week about Internet of Things. That's information intensive interfaces, right? If I'm taking samples off my production line once a second across 10 lines, that's a lot of data. It has to flow up to the cloud. So just be careful. On the flip side, you want to integrate your e-com system. That's high volume potentially, right? So your system context is the most important thing to understand when you're going through a SaaS determination, okay? That's why you're seeing these big infrastructure centers spring up, Amazon, Azure, and these types of things, is because now you're inside the walls and you can get high speed throughput with web service calls and stuff between your applications. Make sense? Okay. Data conversions. Very little difference other than, again, if you have a terabyte of data that you're going to try to load through the internet, that's probably a bad idea, okay? So what information do you need to load up to your SaaS environment? How much data? What do you need to convert? It's important to know and to talk it through with whoever the SaaS provider is that you're talking to make sure you understand how are you going to do these bulk data loads. And then the key is, as always, is to focus on your data integrity, referential integrity, meaning one system that you call a customer is the same as what that customer's called on another system and on the third system. That's all important. So focus on your referential integrity across your systems. Okay. Look at it at an enterprise level first. Which system is going to be the master of the master data? And how are you going to sync that up to the other systems? It's the same question as of today. It just gets a little bit more complicated because of these remote service calls. Okay. Enhancements and reports. There's a whole range of spectrums in terms of different vendors' philosophy on enhancements and reports and those types of things. The theory, and every year we're getting closer and closer to it, is that the system that you're getting out of the box in a SaaS environment is configurable and adaptable to what you need versus writing it from scratch. Some of the systems will have what they're called user development kits, UDKs, user development kits, where you can do some like sort of on the top side of enhancements. But you have to make sure that the software is going to be a good fit for your business. Okay, if it's not a good fit, you're going to have less flexibility potentially in terms of adapting that system to what you do. So the out-of-the-box fit is more important, and making sure you understand how configurable that software is for your needs. Okay, and I'm going to be interested in what Brian has to say about in terms of how you help handle some of that as you moved into the SaaS. So I'm looking forward to that. And then the interfaces are easier to build, right? They've got exposed web services, which is basically every function that you're calling in the system is exposed so that I can call it remotely. So the web services are great, but you have to pay attention again to throughput. Okay, is it a single threaded? When you get into high volume interfaces, now you have to start working with their architects in terms of how to accomplish that. Business process definitions, little difference there, really. How you run in the cloud versus how you run on-prem, it's the same business scenarios that you have to test. Again, I'd like to take an order to cash, plan to produce kind of a view of things. With what we call a process maturity model, which is where do you want to be the day you go live is not necessarily where you want to be in 2 years after you go live. And what's the plan to ultimately get to the ROI that you use to justify on the front end? We invariably see a lot of focus on transactions and enabling the transactions through the system. And the ROI question starts to kind of take a back seat the more you get tired out during the implementation, right? So don't forget about that stuff. And let's put a plan together of like what's going to go on year 2 and year 3 after go live to make sure that you achieve the ROI. Something to keep in mind is if you're in a regulated industry, where if you change your process, you got to get recertified. So food and bev is an example of that, right? So if I got an SQF and I'm changing my document management handling and those types of things, SaaS by its definition is putting out releases, right? And sometimes you have a few options. Do you want to take it on this date or this date? But if the SaaS release is changing your processes, make sure you understand if there's any regulatory implications, right? Because you're going to have to time the recertification of those processes. Versus on-prem, you tend to have a little bit more control, which unfortunately then takes the form of I've never upgraded in 5 years or 10 years, which is not good either, right? So it's just something just to keep in mind. And then the last thing here is change management. I love this guy, Cotter. John Cotter wrote a book called Leading Change or Managing Change. And our Ultra's change management methodology is really kind of wrapped around this. And the point is that for people to get on board with something, there has to be a compelling reason to change. Okay. And then it has to do with building a guiding coalition. How does that fit in? Right. So guiding coalition is your steering team. Make sure you know who the movers and shakers are that are going to drive the change in the business. And those are not necessarily just the leaders, right? Who are the respected people in your organization? Focus on them, get them on board, generate short-term wins. Okay. So these are all great ideas. So the name of the book again is Cotter, Leading Change. If you do nothing else out of today for me, read that book. It will help you really kind of get your head around how to manage change in your company.